it really comes out of the concept that all leadership starts with self-leadership. If you can't lead yourself well, how do you expect to lead others well? Or how do you expect to lead an entire enterprise well? So, and honestly, that's one of your greatest leadership challenges, is that it's that person that looks back at you from the mirror every day, that you have to lead yourself.
Welcome to Rise and Stride, where we empower you to take your next step in an ever-changing business landscape. Here's your host, Denise LeDuc-Fremming, President and CEO of the California Society of CPAs.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for another episode of Rise and Stride, where we bring together diverse voices to explore leading topics to help you navigate the seemingly ever-changing business landscape. Today's guest, and I'm so grateful for, Jon Lokhorst, a CPA, leadership coach, keynote speaker, and author who helps organizations develop leaders that people want to follow. With more than 30 years of experience spanning public accounting, nonprofit leadership, and executive roles, Jon is the founder of Your Best Leadership, where he partners with organizations to build stronger leaders and healthier teams and cultures. He's the author of Mission Critical Leadership: How Smart Managers Lead Well in AI Directions, in all directions. Oh, I have AI in my mind, in all directions, where he challenges the traditional view of leadership and introduces a practical framework for leading, not just down, but across and as well up, right? So you have to lead all different ways with leadership. So Jon, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to get your perspective and hear just your experiences and all that you're seeing out there.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to the conversation too, Denise. So thanks for the opportunity to have the conversation with you.
Yeah, I don't know why I said AI leadership, but AI is on our minds,
I
isn't
know
it?
you can't go anywhere without that coming up. And I guess maybe AI directions in all directions, it's not any different.
There you go. Or renaming the book for the next,
There you
right? For the
go.
next version. We're ahead of it. So maybe before we get into some of the real nitty-gritty of leadership, you can talk to us a bit about, we always like to hear about your journey as a CPA, to your nonprofit work and your professional coaching, because when you become a CPA, it's not always a natural fit, and you would not think, oh, that's where I'm going to be. So I'd love to hear more about your journey.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm not the first person that's ended up in a place completely different where they expected to be when they first started their career. But as you mentioned, I started out my career in public accounting. I was part of a small firm in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area where I'm from, and live not too far from there now, about an hour north. And really, it was quite an experience, because I started out, even before I had graduated, I was working part-time in the firm, and then became a staff accountant, eventually became a partner, and then the managing partner in that firm. And as you indicated, after 18 years, I made a shift then into the nonprofit world. And I started out as a CFO, the typical type of CFO that most people listening to the podcast would relate to, the chief financial officer of a nonprofit that was in startup rapid growth mode, a growth curve that was almost straight up. And that was a phenomenal experience. And then I made a shift into a different kind of CFO role. I was the chief fundraising officer for a couple of nonprofit organizations, including one out there in California. So sometimes I described it as I moved from the debit side of the ledger to the credit side of the
Really?
ledger. And then in 2016, transitioned out of my last day job, as I refer to it, to start Your Best Leadership. And it really was the culmination, although at the time it might have seemed a little strange in terms of that career path. I'd always had a strong interest and passion for leadership and leadership development. Could trace it back even to the days when I was in middle school and high school, probably seeing it, big sports fan all my life. And so seeing that and watching some of the inner workings. And then while I was in high school, had an opportunity to work in a bank during my summers. So about 5 years, 7 years working in a bank during the summer from my high school to college years. And so I got to see it in a business environment. So that interest in leadership really carried through my entire career, even when I was in roles that didn't have a whole lot to do with leadership or leadership development. So it was a fairly natural transition into that world back in 2016.
Mm-hmm. I too was the same. I did accounting work, and then I did staff, CFO, COO, CEO, and um, I when you talk about leadership, I think sometimes we shortchange the leadership you need, especially for the two roles you had, because you don't you can't just tell a team what to do, right? Or even you're influencing the whole organization. And with fundraising, you're having to influence. And so to me, the influence is so much harder than even just telling direct reports, right? Guiding, coaching, inspiring. But you were in roles that really required influence.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, you can play that boss card. There's a certain amount of authority that comes with being the boss and having that title. And yet, if you play that boss card too often, it starts to become really ineffective, and people tend to check out. And nobody really wants to work with a leader like that. And what I found is that some of the best leaders that I've had a chance to work for, to work with, they rarely, if ever, play that boss card. And they have the presence where the boss card's in their back pocket, but it's like they almost never have to pull it out. And it's because, yeah, they've developed trust and influence, and they're really engaging with their team. And it's interesting, you referred to the fundraising role because, yeah, certainly that whole idea of leading beyond just being a good boss to leading up, down, and across the organization. But there's also a lot of leadership when it comes to fundraising. Just like I'll tell those people that working public accounting, is the relationship that you have with your clients is in a lot of ways a leadership role. So all of those things that can make you a strong leader when it comes to the people on your team or in your organization are helpful in those external relationships as well.
Mm-hmm. What is the, just curious, what is the best like boss you had? What was the quality that you most admired in that person?
Yeah, great question, Denise. And I think the best boss that I ever had, his name was also John, was in the nonprofit where I was the CFO, that rapidly growing nonprofit. And I think what I would say made him the best is that he had the ability, he had a unique way of bringing what I call the 2 R's of leadership into his practice of leadership. The 2 R's of leadership, meaning that you have to build results, build relationships, and deliver results. So relationships and results. And most of the leaders that I've worked with have a pull more naturally in one of those directions versus the other. And I've got a profile tool that kind of shows you where you land in that. And he had this unique ability, even though he had some natural tendencies of his own, where he could bring just the right dose of relationship or the right dose of that focus on results into the conversations and into that practice of leadership. And where it showed up in a lot of ways was he also had this real knack for what I refer to as supportive accountability. And supportive accountability, the way that I describe it, is that you can show that team member that you have their best interest at heart, that you are there to walk alongside of them and you're there to support them, but you're not letting them off the hook for their responsibilities. You're not letting them off the hook of accountability when they mess up and they need some of that corrective feedback and maybe some redirection. And he was just a master at that whole practice of supportive accountability.
Mm, I love that. I do because it's a yin and a yang, right? I
It
mean,
is, yeah, it
both,
really
and
is.
yeah, that it really makes you think. So you talk about your best leadership, right? And that's the name of your organization. So how do you define a great leader, stages, and are there? I mean, there's probably always continuous growth that you can do. I'm assuming.
Yeah,
'Cause
absolutely. And I think
you
that
never
is
get to
one of
great, great.
yeah, well, that is one of the markers of a great leader, is that they never feel like they've arrived, that they're realizing that they're always a work in process. And I remember hearing of one CEO that was promoted into that CEO role and was very successful in that role. And when he was asked about it later, what was it that made you so successful? He said, I never stopped trying to become qualified for the job. And so he had this sense that he was never really fully qualified to serve as the CEO. And so he had to continue to work for it. And that shows that growth mindset. So I think that's certainly an element of that great leader. The other one, and I'd go back to the 2 R's and maybe saying it a little bit different way. And even in your introduction, you made reference to this. I think of those leaders that everyone wants to follow, those are people who their team members know that they have their best interest at heart. That they really want the best for each of those team members. And at the same time, they're able to bring together that group, that team, to work for the results that that organization needs. And there's some tension in that. In a lot of ways, leadership is nothing more than just navigating tensions all the time. And that's a big one because at the one side, you want to try to do what's best for your team. You want to give them what they need, what they want. But that's not always possible given the results that you have to deliver, the deadlines, the budget targets that you have to meet, and some of the other factors that are in there. So there's always this tension in there. In some ways, I think of it almost like this teeter-totter where
Mhm.
it's never in perfect equilibrium. There's this back and forth, the yin yang that you talked about earlier.
Mhm. I think about all when we're all young professionals, right? We think, oh, we want to be a leader. We want people under us. We think that, and under is not the right way, right? It's just working together collaboratively. But we think about what we think a leader is and what they do. But speak to me maybe more about what you're seeing, the changes with the leaders, with the new world we're in and the fast pace, because you do talk about navigating tensions. And I think a lot of times when we go into leadership positions, we don't think about that piece of it and the people and how important it is to inspire and coach people. Can you talk a bit about that? Because I'm just curious what you're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think where that inspiration and that coaching, the focus on development is so important, is that it can really be easy to fall into that trap of just looking at your team as the work that needs to get done. And no one wants to feel like they're just a cog in the machine, that they are just valued for whatever their production is. And unfortunately, it doesn't matter if we're talking about the public side of the industry or if we're talking about business and industry, governmental, nonprofit, et cetera. There can be this real tendency to get caught into that production mode because it seems like it doesn't matter where you are. There's this constancy of deadlines and projects that need to get done and clients that need to be satisfied, whether those are external clients or internal clients. And so you can get really caught up in all that. And if you add another part of the public accounting side, there's this relentless pursuit of billable hours that
Mm-hmm.
is part of that economic engine. So it can be real easy if a leader is not careful to where there's so much focus on the results, on the work that needs to get done, that people do feel like they're just a cog in the machine, that they just feel what their only value is what they produce, and they may only receive feedback when something is wrong. And I just had this conversation with one of my coaching clients the other day where it seemed like in that firm there was such a grind during the tax season that almost all that the staff was hearing from leadership was on the negative side, and that creates this disengagement. Who wants to work in an environment like that where you're taken for granted, you're undervalued or even devalued in the work that you're doing, and you don't have this sense that your leader or the leadership within your firm or your organization is wanting to see you grow and wanting to see you proceed in your career.
Mm-hmm. It's today we had just a conversation in a panel, and there was seasoned leaders and then a young emerging professional on there, and they were talking about leadership. She was saying, exactly what you're saying. We know we're in a grind. We know we work 80 hours. It's helpful as leaders for you to provide the why for us and that strategy where we're going. And also, we want to innovate, but working 80 hours, we can't always do that. So help us to understand how we can fit that in. And so they're looking for, they understand the grind. I think a lot do, but they need help in framing and helping them to understand more. Are you hearing that from young leaders? And is that new?
Uh, I think the challenges are becoming more intense than in the past, and I think there's some generational differences there as well, where it's real easy to pick on the younger generation, and to some extent, every every new generation that comes in gets picked on by the generations ahead of them. I remember when I first started my career in public accounting, it was back in the 80s, and the personal computer and the desktop software and everything like that. And some of the, I'll call them the seasoned professionals, would say, "Oh, you don't even really know what it's like to have to make a manual journal entry and to post those to, manual ledgers and to roll that all up into a financial statement. You got it so easy." And and there's always been that tendency to look at the next generation. Well, they don't work as hard as we do, and and I get that sometimes. And I'm the tail end of the baby boomers, and so I hear that from my cohort, my generation, oftentimes. And at times I'll actually pause the conversation. I'll say, "Hey, look, I hear what you're saying, but what if this younger generation or these younger generations are the smart ones? And we were the ones that sold our soul to the company and were willing to just put it all on the line and to work those 80-hour weeks without any expectation that we were being developed and that we had an opportunity to make a difference. We just we're in there doing our work, and it was work for the sake of work." And I think that's one of the big differences. And I'm really grateful for those younger generations that have wanted to know the answer to that question. Why is this important? Why is this valuable? And I think to some extent, again, going back to my generation, the baby boomers, I think we wanted to know that too. We just didn't have that same courage maybe to speak up and to ask some of those questions, because the reality is, I think that's part of the human experience. We want to know that we're making a difference. We want to know that the work that we're doing is for some greater good as opposed to just checking boxes. So I think that some of the conversations may be more intense than what they were in the past, but I feel like that's always been a part of the experience. And it's really been incumbent on leaders to break through all of that and to provide the vision, to provide the purpose, to provide the meaning, and help connect the dots, even for those individuals who may not be all that close to what's seen anyway as the value of the work that gets delivered. Again, whether your clients are internal or external.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what someone said today too. One of the young emerging professionals said, "We want to know we're making a difference. Help us to know
Yeah,
that." So that's
for
really,
sure.
it's important to everybody. No one wants to think they're just coming in, right, punching the clock,
Yep.
so to speak. I can relate to that long ago when I was young. Question for you, you talk about inside out, leading from the inside out. Maybe talk to us what you mean about that. I think I understand, but I want to know from you.
Yeah, and that inside out facet, it really comes out of the concept that all leadership starts with self-leadership. If you can't lead yourself well, how do you expect to lead others well? Or how do you expect to lead an entire enterprise well? So, and honestly, that's one of your greatest leadership challenges, is that it's that person that looks back at you from the mirror every day, that you have to lead yourself. And it takes a lot of that internal recognition, knowing who you are. We use that term self-awareness, and there's multiple facets to self-awareness. I think some of it starts with understanding your natural tendencies, your natural wiring. Going back to the 2 R's, are you more relationship oriented or results oriented, and to what degree? And to what degree do you have some potential to overplay those strengths to the place where they're counterproductive? So taking it beyond that, just those unique strengths or superpowers that you have that enable you to bring your best value as a leader. And then whether it's the flip side of those same strengths or other tendencies that you might have to get in your own way, where you're ineffective or you're counterproductive. Sometimes those being blind spots where you don't even realize that you have those tendencies, or maybe you realize that you have the tendencies, but you don't see the impact that has on other people. So I think there's self-awareness at that level. I think there's self-awareness from an emotional intelligence level, just in terms of how you respond in different situations. What are some of the triggers that cause you to not be your best self? And how do you manage yourself? How do you manage those emotions? And then when it comes to other people, recognizing their emotional makeup and how they respond to different situations. Because on the people side, you've got to be able to read other people, and that takes a certain amount of that emotional intelligence. So That leading from the inside out, I think a lot of it does come from that self-awareness. And then just how do you navigate from day to day? How do you manage your time? How do you manage your energy? Some of the work-life tensions that come into play, so that you've got a holistic kind of healthiness to a person at that full person level.
Mm-hmm. Sandra, when you said, self-awareness and understanding kind of how you impact others, right? So when you think about like hybrid and virtual, it's very difficult a lot of times to see. You can't see people's hands. You can't see their full self, and people aren't. You just aren't having the conversations that you used to have. And I'm a believer in virtual, and we're all virtual. But what would advice would you give to firms to help build cultures that are engaging and where people feel like they have a place in their herd, knowing that it's not as easy for that to be seen as engaging.
Yeah, and I think the challenges really come from the fact that it's not like you need a lot of different competencies or mindsets from a leadership standpoint. The fundamentals are still there, but it's almost like on steroids, where you need to just have that much more intentionality in any area of leadership and any of the practices of leadership. So whether we're talking about giving positive and corrective feedback, you have to be that much more intentional than you might be if you're all working together under the same roof. We learned during the pandemic where there was this big shift at first where everybody cleared out of the office. Now we have a lot of organizations that have come back, or maybe they've come back in part and they have more of a hybrid kind of environment. But what we learned when everybody scattered and went to their own home offices or wherever they went was how much we missed all of those informal interactions, that the opportunities in the margin that you have for communication and building relationships and asking questions, providing feedback. And that's why I say you just have to have so much more intentionality when you have remote or hybrid work, where you're not necessarily crossing paths with people from day to day. You're not passing by somebody's office or somebody's cubicle where, as a leader, you almost develop this sixth sense where you think, I think John might really be struggling right now. Just the way he's looking at his screen, or it's the vibe that I'm getting coming out of his cubicle. It's really hard to replicate that in a remote environment where you're talking across flat screen to flat screen. So the more intentional, the more structured communication, making sure that there's the one-on-one check-ins that you have, whether it's on a weekly basis or a day-to-day basis. A lot of that comes down to the nature of the relationship, the maturity, the experience level of the person that you're overseeing. That all has to be taken into account on that. And then of course, anytime it's a team environment, recognizing you may have some people that are in office, some people that are working remote, and that might shift. It might not be the same from one meeting to the next. So it just takes a lot more of that planning and coordinating, the intentionality around that. I do believe, Denise, whether it's a full-on remote environment or if it's a hybrid environment, finding ways to bring people together in person on some regular basis. And that's going to depend on how decentralized you are, how much travel is involved, and what kind of budget it would take to bring people together. But I'm finding even those that are very decentralized, having at least once or twice a year where you bring everybody together in person. If it's a retreat format, it might be a combination of business and socializing. But even beyond that, if it's more people are more localized, finding those opportunities and then just being really intentional when you do bring people together face to face, that you maximize that time for communication, relationship building, the collaboration. That it's not that it can't be done in a virtual environment. It's just that much more challenging to pull that off.
And I think too, we're just not used to it a lot of
Right.
times. And so it is, you have to be more
Even
intentional. Like
6 years since the pandemic, we're still trying to figure it out.
yeah, it's because if you haven't had a relationship with someone before, I've noticed, and have kind of that, um, I don't know, that connection, it's harder to build it. But the opportunities in the margin, I like that better than the water cooler, but I do feel like that is that, right? You just don't have that opportunity to see someone or say, have a casual conversation. It has to be scheduled somewhat or say, can I ping you? So it's a little,
Yeah, I think that's the trick on that. And just, from a leadership standpoint, it's important to realize that you have to take the responsibility for that proactive communication,
Mhm.
because no matter how accessible or approachable you feel like you are, there is always going to be a little bit of power distance in the different levels of the organization. And so knowing that that person that's at that staff accountant level or that senior accountant level may have some hesitancy. Oh, I don't really want to bother him. I don't know if this is a good time for her to talk, and I don't even want to ping them because that might throw them off. So I think it just requires. I like to use the term rules of engagement. Having some
Mhm.
understanding as to how all of that works and some of those unique situations that you have to address that are different in virtual environments than they might be in person. And one of the other facets that I'm sure you've seen this too. I'm sure you have people at Cal CPA that started in their roles after the pandemic when there was
Right.
this big shift to virtual. So they don't even have the advantage of that season when most people were working together in person. And of course, you got a wide geographic spread, and so it's not like you had everybody, together every day. And of course, you're getting out to see your members all over the state, but you had a lot more of that opportunity to have that FaceTime where somebody that came in during the pandemic or after when there's this shift to remote work, they've had so much more limited face time with people. And there really is an extra dynamic, that stickiness in relationship that you get when you have time that you can spend face to face.
Hmm. Just so many different conversations you have when you're just sitting there, right? And you're maybe having a drink together or you're having,
Oh, yeah.
just
Just the walk
eating
down the
and
hallway or
breaking
the
bread
walk to the
together.
car.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how many times I'm in the office with one or two people and we start talking and we're standing in the hallway or walking to the car. And those are sometimes where, you know, magical moments happen where you think of something.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. I do. Yeah, I can see where that could be missed. So I have to be careful of time, but I could talk to you. We'll have to get together again, John. I think we'll have the moments to do that for sure over the next couple of months. But a question for you as we close, and as leaders out there are looking to kind of up their game to elevate what they're doing to grow, what's one thing they could implement today that they could say, "Oh, I started and I'm going to see a difference."
Yeah, and I don't know, I might roll a few things into the one if you
You
can
go.
give me a little latitude on that, because I think some of it comes back to, again, intentionality. Part of leadership is that intentionality. And so if you want to become a leader or you want to get better as a leader, it takes some intentionality. And I think it's a matter of actually planning it out. If you don't already have something like this in your organization, creating some type of professional development plan or leadership development plan. I'll use the initials LDP for that. And then a couple of specific tools that can be helpful along with that. One would be going back to that self awareness and having that understanding of your unique strengths and some of the potential struggles or barriers to your effectiveness. So, using a profile tool, and I've got a tool from Right Path Resources that I use because it's really focused on workplace behavior, and it creates some really good insights on that, where it jogs some ideas that can be woven into a leadership development plan. So a tool like that is great from the standpoint of self feedback or self driven feedback, but then also getting feedback from others. And there's a number of 360 tools out there. They tend to be fairly extensive and even expensive because you generally are doing this with an outside consultant, but you can get the same benefit on your own. I call it the DIY 360. And it's a framework that I created. It really came out of reading a Harvard Business Review article about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. And it's a pretty simple tool where, using that up, down, and across idea about leadership, where you try to get some feedback from a couple of superiors, a couple of peers, a couple of direct reports, and framing up some of those questions, sitting down, having a cup of coffee or a virtual cup of coffee to try to get some specific feedback. And it's like, oh, yeah, that gives me something that's really actionable that I can work on. I can build that into that leadership development plan. and then trying to keep that feedback loop going where if let's say you and I are the ones that are having that conversation and you've given me some really helpful feedback, I can come back to you 30, 60 days later. Hey, Denise, this was something that you suggested that I work on. I've made a concerted effort. I'm just curious, are you seeing any changes in that? Or are you seeing any movement? Am I getting better in that area? And so you're always fine tuning that progress, getting beyond just that annual review, which has some pretty significant limitations from a development standpoint, even just from the fact that it only happens once a year. Making it much more real-time development is the key to really proceeding and progressing.
We've started to do, and it's been all of us have to develop through that, but we do the monthly milestone. So every month, we don't do annual reviews, but we do monthly.
Love that.
And so, yeah, it's helpful because I think things are top of mind. And also, we can have conversations that at the end of the year, it's too late and no one remembers, right? So on a monthly basis, it just allows you to have a connection point, and
Yeah, it's not this
check it.
it's not this long laundry list that quite often Ken Blanchard, one of my favorite leadership expert, uses the term gunny sacking, where it's like you take the gunny sack and you dump all the garbage out on the table that, from the past year, and you go through this laundry list. The monthly approach is really great because then as a leader, it puts you in the place where you can really do some significant and valuable coaching around whatever those areas are, whether it's somebody where you see some real great progress that you want to build on, or there's some gaps, some deficiencies that you want to address. So I love that approach.
Yeah, we're trying to hardwire it. So that's our goal.
There you go.
I just would say, thank you. I think the coaching is so important in what you're doing. So many times we get that later in our career and we don't get it early enough. And I just would encourage everyone to invest in themselves. So I think it's really important. And John, you probably see so many success stories from people taking time and investing.
Absolutely. I think it's important to have input from others in interaction with others because you're fairly limited. You can do as much looking in the mirror as you want to, but you also bring some biases to that view, and having somebody else that can speak into and really from the standpoint of motivationally trying to develop you as a person is so helpful. And I've been blessed with many leaders that have done that for me.
I have too. I've been so blessed. So would say if you are a leader, help others. And if you are wanting to be, grow your leadership, as John said, be intentional. And thank you, John, for being, leading up our leader lab, because I know you'll be working with a number of our members. So we really appreciate that. And honestly, everything you do for the CPA profession, because we all need, in this world that's full of a lot of uncertainty and a lot of angst, we really need to be reminded of what leadership is.
And thank you, Denise. It's always a pleasure. Love the conversation. I always learn, even though I'm the one that's being asked the questions, I'm always learning as we go too.
Leadership is humbling as well. So thank you. And we'll look forward to more conversations with you, John. And to our listeners, thank you for listening in today. We appreciate that. And be on the lookout for this podcast to drop. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Rise and Stride is produced by the California Society of Certified Public Accountants. To learn more, visit calcpa.org.